Up to a third of currently unemployed workers, as well as workers receiving reduced pay, are not eligible for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit or other benefits. Inequalities for migrant and disabled workers have been especially magnified with the rollout of the CERB, as these vulnerable workers are not receiving additional support. Other supports for precarious workers, such as food banks, are shutting down just as demand for their help is rapidly increasing. Health workers, cleaners, gig workers, delivery workers, food workers, and others who have been identified as essential workers are being forced to risk their lives with no improvement to their dangerous working conditions. This comes at great cost to their health and the health of society in general. A lot of other workers who are still working today who aren't receiving the support that they need.
I also want to add to it. It's also the failure of the Canadian government to see that this country is livable as it is because of the migrant workers. We need to see and recognize that migrant workers and undocumented, they are the ones who make this country livable, as much as possible. And the problem with this country, the problem with the system that we're in right now, like dividing and conquering, they're dividing the working class, whether or not we're coming from all walks of life. And at the end of the day, it's us, the working class, especially the migrant workers, who make this country moving forward. And the fact of the matter is that the CERB is not allowing migrant workers, especially the undocumented ones, or to gain access to the benefit is just foul, because these migrant workers are also deemed frontliners as well. I mean, they're the ones who work at the grocery store and for the migrant workers, we got to see that at the end of the day, it's the class, it's the working class that, again, who is making this country as livable as possibly as it could be. And the government also needs to recognize that they need to be protected. The migrant workers, especially the undocumented, needs to be protected, and so that they can also have their families and themselves be protected as well from the virus, because the virus impacts everyone, especially to the very marginalized in the society.
In this time, I think the actions and the inactions of governments really have an influence on how we move forward as a society. They really have an impact on the face of public policy in the future. The governments, I think, are very calculated in how much they want to provide to people, because people are realizing that, like, we actually don't need a lot of industries like labor. There is essential labor, and we're looking at it right now, and we're seeing who's working right now. There's probably other industries that could be essential labor, but there's so much that is wasteful in our society, in our economy. But more so than that, I think the governments are purposely not giving much to the working class, because it will become a benchmark of negotiation for the working class going forward. I think it's a very calculated move that's happening by the governments.
Do we want to move to the next point?
In Canada, the government's approach has been one of policing and enforcement rather than support and solidarity. Social distancing alone is an ineffective response. Capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism have worsened the pandemic's effects. Cuts and privatization to the healthcare system have limited our capacity to respond to pandemics. Lack of clean water and safe housing for migrant, Black, and Indigenous peoples mean that they are being hit hard by the pandemic. Extraction projects in Indigenous communities have continued without pause. Even calls from Indigenous communities to stop these projects on the basis of public health have been ignored. Prisons, jails, and detention centers threaten the lives of their predominantly racialized inmates, whether they are victims of the criminal justice system or draconian quarantine rules, and threaten public health by incubating the disease. Police shootings have skyrocketed. Meanwhile, providing food for the hungry, medicines for the sick or disabled, support for parents who have to work while also supporting their children, all of this is considered responsibilities for individuals.
I think it's important to remember a lot of people who have been forced to move their jobs online, especially the teachers. They haven't been given this necessary support by their institutions to do that. So I think it's really important to remember that people just haven't been helped.
We're seeing this sort of like what neoliberalism is. I mean, without neoliberalism, like violence is inherent in capitalism. But with neoliberalism, we're seeing the thinning out of the social provision. So anything that resembles welfare states and buffing up of the repressive state apparatuses like police and military. It's part of the sort of contradictions of neoliberalism. On the one hand, like sort of there's like an ideology of like individualism. We all have to like buckle, we have to tighten up our belt and take care of, like self-preservation. And then, but also like really sort of the armed enforcement of that, like the repressive enforcement of that ideology by the police.
It really shows the way the logic of just-in-time production and minimal staffing have extended all over through everything, including the whole social system. There's just enough nurses and just enough beds, and profit margins are calculated very carefully. And we can see that this is what happens when you take that and you extend it from just commodity production to all life. Like that's really the core of neoliberalism for me.
What it also speaks to is that there has been a rhetoric that, the coronavirus is an equalizer, that all segments of all classes are being impacted in the same way. And what this section speaks to for me is that actually with corona, racialized communities that already don't have enough infrastructure to support their communities are being completely devastated, especially Black communities in the States. That this lie, this fallacy, manipulated by a ruling class that we're all in this together, will come out stronger after Corona to prevent people from struggling against the capitalist system. So I really appreciate this section.